Welcome, students, to Chapter 7, which covers depressive and bipolar disorders. We are going to be looking in this chapter at depression and mania, depressive disorders, unipolar depression, and bipolar disorder, and we'll talk about those in a few moments. First, we're going to start with unipolar depression, and that's depression that does not involve any mania. 8% of U.S. adults suffer from severe unipolar depression in any given year, and 5% suffer from mild forms. 20% of all adults experience unipolar depression at some time in life, and the average age of onset is only 19. The DSM-5, which is in text revision now, lists several types of depressive disorders, including major depressive disorder, persistent depressive disorder, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And when we're looking at a major depressive episode, which is the first thing that we'll talk about, we're talking about a 2-week period where a person displays an increase in depressed mood for the majority of each day, and or a decrease in enjoyment or interest across most activities for the majority of each day. For the same 2 weeks, a person also experiences at least 3 or 4 of the following symptoms that you see in the middle of the slide. There's a repeated focus on death or suicide, a suicide plan, or a suicide attempt at times, and there is clinically significant distress or impairment. In terms of major depressive disorder, again, there is no pattern of mania or hypomania, which we'll talk about. For a more persistent depressive disorder diagnosis, the person experiences the symptoms of major or mild depression for at least 2 years. During the 2-year period, symptoms are not absent for more than 2 months at a time. There is no mania, and there is also clinically significant distress or impairment. Treatments in the biological area for unipolar depression include antidepressant drugs. The MAO class is a common one, the tricyclic antidepressants, second-generation antidepressants, and the ketamine-based drugs. We also have different types of brain stimulation that we'll talk about. But first, in terms of the second-generation antidepressants, what they are aimed at is increasing levels primarily of norepinephrine and serotonin neurotransmitters in the brain. And you can see this is one neuron here and a second neuron below it. And what happens when there's an action potential in the brain is that the energy flows through the one neuron, and there are these neurotransmitters that are dumped in the synapse in between both neurons. And in depression, too many of these neurotransmitters are taken up by the receiving neuron. So the second-generation antidepressants are aimed at keeping more of these neurotransmitters in the synapse, and that helps people feel better. The ketamine-based antidepressants include increased activity of glutamate in the brain, which is another neurotransmitter. This may aid in a new neural pathway development. It often alleviates depression quickly, combines well with other drugs, especially is beneficial for those who are unresponsive to others and who are also suicidal because there's good short-term impact. If drugs aren't effective, sometimes brain stimulation may be tried, and we have different modalities that can be used to stimulate the brain. Electroconvulsive therapy is one where there are electrodes that are attached to the scalp and the brain receives an electrical current. We also have vagal nerve stimulators, transcranial magnetic stimulation that involves the use of a magnet to send regular electrical signals, and then deep brain stimulation. This psychological models of unipolar depression started with the psychodynamic model. And Freud and Abraham hypothesized that some people experience real or imagined losses, and that produces depression. Then the object relations theorists came along and said, Really, depression results when people's early relationships leave them feeling unsafe and insecure, especially early in life. But it doesn't necessarily have to be an actual loss. In terms of research, certainly some of these ideas are supported, but depression doesn't always indicate that there's an early loss or problematic relationship. Basic psychodynamic procedures and therapy are used for depression that we've talked about before, including free association and different types of clinician interpretations. More commonly used than the psychodynamic model these days is the cognitive behavioral view. And this school says that depression results from problematic behaviors and dysfunctional thinking patterns. They look at the behavioral dimension of people's functioning and the negative thoughts that are associated with behaviors, and then the feelings that come from those thoughts, and so how that interplay works. Beck's cognitive therapy has 4 components that have been widely used. He advocated increasing activities and elevating moods, challenging automatic thoughts that include these very strong negative thoughts and biases. For example, I always have trouble in school. And so he would help people change those primary attitudes so that they had more beneficial thoughts and feelings as a result. There are new wave theorists in the field that have developed acceptance and commitment therapy, and they advocate for people to recognize and accept negative cognitions and then move off of them, just let them be. There is an evaluation component that's effective with unipolar depression and with follow-up preventative cognitive therapy. Another model of unipolar depression has to do with the idea of learned helplessness, and Martin Seligman developed that. He stated that depression occurs when people believe that they have no control over life's reinforcements and assume responsibility for a helpless state. And the attribution helplessness theory that resulted from this research said that we have these internal attributions that are global and stable. As an example, I never do well in school. So that produces, attribution of our present lack of control, and then we feel helpless to prevent future negative outcomes because it's not changeable based on the way that we're thinking about it, and therefore depression results. Also, unipolar depression is influenced by social context and often triggered by outside stressors. The family social perspective and the multicultural perspective focus in on those kinds of triggers. The family social perspective says that we have a decline in social rewards, and that produces depression. So depressed people often demonstrate social deficits that have other people then react negatively to them. So they don't have as many social contacts or rewards as people who have better social skills. And depression is tied to weak or unavailable social support, isolation, and lack of intimacy. Also tied repeatedly to troubled and unhappy marriages. And depression is linked to social isolation and also imposed social distancing, such as we've had with COVID. Family and social treatments involve interpersonal psychotherapy that help people with loss, with role disputes, with role transitions in life, and with interpersonal deficits. And these types of treatments have a success rate that is similar to that of cognitive behavioral therapy. They may include, family and social treatments may include couples therapy, and they may integrate couples therapy with CBT and other sociocultural techniques. In terms of the multicultural perspective, we know that depression is a worldwide phenomenon, but it varies from place to place. In depressed people from non-Western countries, we are more likely to see them troubled by physical symptoms more so than cognitive ones. But as societies become more westernized, depression becomes more cognitively based. The multicultural researchers also look a lot at gender and depression because across cultures, women are twice as likely as men to receive a diagnosis of unipolar depression. Women that suffer from depression appear to be younger, have more frequent and longer lasting bouts, and respond less successfully to treatment. Culture-sensitive therapies address unique issues faced by members of cultural minority groups. There is cultural training and heightened awareness, development of comfortable bicultural balance, and recognition of impact of one's own culture and the dominant culture that are focused on when we look at multicultural treatments. And these are combined with traditional forms of psychotherapy. Bipolar disorders involve lows of depression as well as highs of mania. There are huge shifts between very extreme moods, and it has a dramatic impact on relatives and friends of people who suffer from these disorders. Approximately 10 to 15% of people with bipolar disorder eventually die by suicide. Bipolar disorders involve a manic episode that and is for at least 1 week, where a person displays a continually abnormal, inflated, and unrestrained or irritable mood, as well as heightened energy or activity for most of every day. They also experience at least 3 of the symptoms that you see in the middle of the slide. And there is clinically significant distress or impairment. So I want to focus on what mania can look like with these symptoms. Lots of really grandiose thoughts about big self-esteem, reduced need for sleep, rapidly shifting ideas or racing thoughts, attentions pulled in many different directions, heightened activity or agitated movements, and excessive pursuit of risky behaviors. So it's problematic. There are 2 kinds of bipolar disorder in the DSM-5, bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. Worldwide, up to 2.8% of all adults have bipolar disorder at a given time, and 4.4% have it sometime in life. Onset is usually between 15 and 44, and there are no gender differences, but higher rates in low-income populations. Bipolar 1 disorder involves occurrence of a manic episode. There is hypomanic or major depressive episodes that may precede or follow the manic episode. In bipolar 2 disorder, there's a presence or history of major depressive episodes. There is a presence or history of hypomanic episodes, and there is no history of a manic episode. Hypomanic episodes are less involved than full-blown manic episodes. Cyclothymic disorder is another form of bipolar disorder, but less severe. There are numerous periods of hypomanic symptoms and mild depression symptoms. They last for 2 or more years with normal moods for days or weeks in between. There are no gender differences. These types of disorders may evolve into bipolar 1 or bipolar 2, however. Mood stabilizing drugs that treat bipolar disorders include lithium, anti-seizure drugs, and antipsychotic drugs. And they treat mania alone or in combination, and they may be used prophylactically to prevent the development of mania. They are limited in terms of treating bipolar depression, however. So they may be combined with antidepressants, and what is under investigation now is the ketamine usefulness in terms of these symptoms of depression. We also have adjunctive psychotherapies that can be used, different types that at least double the likelihood that bipolar individuals will take their medicine properly and lead better lives. It plays a more central role in cyclothymic disorder. And that's the end of this chapter.